Thank you very much, Antoine. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, it's my pleasure to follow up on this prestigious list of speakers to switch gears a little bit and speak about how do we move from clinical decision to maybe predictive analytics and maybe prescriptive analytics in the future. This is by my conflict of disclosure of conflict of interest for this lecture. So when I try to explain to my mother what intensive care medicine is, I tell her, don't worry, it's exactly like Formula One. It's very quick, it's dangerous, mostly for patients, it's quite expensive, it's high-tech, but it's a beautiful job because it's really teamwork at its best. And indeed, this is teamwork. This is the human resources of our teams. This is how we organize them and distribute them, how we apply technology consistently that actually makes the difference between a good and a bad intensive care team. Or I would say an efficient and effective ICU team. And today it's really important to be efficient because we have to deliver intensive care in the triple challenge context. What I call the triple challenge context is that we all know that there is an increase in healthcare needs as people get older with more comorbidities. We all know that there is a decrease in the resources and the amount of money that we can spend on healthcare. And at the same time, there are changing social values. Changing social values in the caregivers that want to have answer quickly at the bedside without going back to old Mervyn's heroes, and also changing social values in our patients because, believe it or not, they don't want to die. So what makes an intensive care very good and very efficient? It depends upon many factors, internal factors, the structure, the size of your ICU, the technology you get in the ICU, the people, obviously the people, the way you train them, the integration model, the leadership models, that actually is very important. But we also depend upon many external factors, and it's probably much more comfortable providing intensive care in France or even in the UK as compared to resource-limited settings. But the most important thing is that in the end, we are caring for patients, and the product intensive care, delivering intensive care should not change too much based on these factors. And I'm sorry to say that it's not exactly true. I don't have the time to go into details, but we have more and more studies coming up and showing us that there is a volume-outcome relationship in intensive care, especially in the sickest patients, those on mechanical ventilation, high-risk patients with severe sepsis. You do better what you do often, maybe. And if you look at geographical variation, I like this study. It's an interesting study where they looked at outcomes of disease we see quite often in our ICUs, acute MI, congestive heart failure, and so on, and safety of procedures that we perform quite often also in our ICUs. And to make a long story short, when you look at the differences from one place to the next in the same big nation, the United States of America, you can see that there are wide differences. And if you just read the conclusion of this paper, they tell you that it's important to look at regional and local variation in risk-adjusted outcome, and that this probably should be a priority, and that there might exist substantial opportunity for improving patient outcomes. So how do we make decisions at the bedside? We try to look at the patients we have in front of us. We try to gather the resources of our ICUs around the patient bed and look at the available evidence that has been published. And we are always struggling because we are looking at two different things. I mean, determining the best treatment for an individual is something that it's a doctor's job. It's a caregiver's job. Whereas determining the average effect of treatment in a population is a purpose of clinical research. And we are always struggling between those two differences. And I'm sorry to say that today, ICU care is more dangerous than Formula One. People forgot that Formula One was dangerous. Until Senna died on the track, they forgot it. But then they've done their job. They went on and tried to examine systematic factors. And they found that indeed, it's probably crazy to expose the head of the driver. Do we do the same thing? Look at post-operative intensive care. I love these studies for Mervyn. You know, the UK are the center of Europe before Brexit study. On the right side,
we're in the middle.
Not very good. On the left side, you do better. I mean, that's impressive difference from one place to the next. How about mechanical ventilation? Is this a mass destruction weapon? I mean, it's been 17 years now that we've seen that if you reduce tidal volume, you reduce mortality. And still, you look at the lung-safe data, more than 35% of our patients are still ventilated with more than 8 milliliters per kilogram. Come on, that's a wall of shame for our community. We have to do a better job. We have to do a better job, and we have to try to provide the best care at lower cost. And there is a path to this continuous learning healthcare. It starts with making sure that we manage adequately the insight we get from great science, that we use the evidence that is gathered and we use it efficiently every day, and that we capture what we do at the bedside. We capture all the elements of care and the outcomes, and we actually try to improve day after day, night after night. There comes a major difference with Formula One. Who could think that they could run without computers? Who could think that they could race without computers? It does not happen. That's what they are looking lap after lap. Lap after lap, they get information coming back from the car, and that tell them what to do next. Not only the driver, everyone. They are looking at processes that turn this not very ergonomic data into meaningful information. And this is where we need to go. This is where we need to go when we are looking at the various data sources that we have. If we really want to move to the applications and actually improve the way we deliver critical care and improve outcome. And clearly, it's mind-boggling to me to see that still a lot of our ICUs work without EHR. A lot of our ICUs have no EHR, and they are facing every day the challenges of critical care. Training, retaining ICU professionals. They don't choose this job because they like 4 color pens. Providing effective and safe ICU care for every patient, reduce iatrogenic events, improving on the way we communicate, and on getting accurate evaluation of medical conditions, interventions, outcomes, and related costs. That's a part of EHR that actually is of interest to me. In all this mess with computers, and most of them are basically there for billing, the part I'm interested in are the computers that help us to improve the quality of care, decrease medication error, improve the care documentation, evaluate performance, and maybe decrease cost. And none of these benefits actually depend upon any technical consideration. And they don't depend also on our literacy with computers. I mean, it's finished. The nurses all know how to use computers. They have computers in their pocket and they are using them every day. It's not the issue. Where is the issue? Why such a slow adoption? Sometimes because if you design it wrong, it doesn't work. And you get a bright guy that designs it right, then you cross the chasm. That's the main difference. So when you are thinking about picking an EHR for your system, for your ICU, you should think about ICU-specific system, where you connect all devices, where you are going to computerize all the functions with a bottom-up approach. Don't go to your staff and say, hey, I chose this, use it. No, they have to be involved. So step one, obviously, is to think about the care processes. But there's only one goal. optimization of processes. It's not about a nice looking chart. It's about optimization of processes. What we do in the intensive care every day is a mix between patient care, education, and research. But if you do it the old way, you produce paper. If you do it the modern way, you produce data. And that makes a big difference. That makes a huge difference because these data can be used. Obviously, there's no free lunch, and there are challenges of data for machine learning and decision support in the ICU. It comes with the issue of compartmentalization, where obviously you don't want the data to be nominal data. It comes about the issue of integration, where you're going to see that many of the patient data are stored in different places. The harmony, where sometimes clinical concepts are not consistently defined across databases. It comes with corruption as well. Sometimes, if you look at the data that are captured, they are false, just because, for instance, when you're zeroing your sensors, you're recording false pressures. You have sometimes missing data because the people that actually collect them are not necessarily the ones that are going to use them. And also because in the past it's been done mostly for retrospective analysis. And nowadays the challenge is to collect good quality data that are going to be used for something else than retrospective analysis. And obviously it's complex. I mean, let's face it, what we do today in the ICU is at least as complex as driving a Formula One or winning a world championship. It's extremely complex, but already we can use these systems to, for instance, decrease transfusion outside evidence-based indication, get information on blood glucose level for your patients, and actually, just with active alerts, just improve the time spent within a reasonable range for glucose level. And again, just with active alerts again, trying to identify patients that are at risk for progression of acute kidney injury, and not only getting the message, oh, bad news, talk to the family, but actually do something and increase therapeutic intervention in order to reduce the progression of acute kidney injury. So that's now, that's not the future. That is now, today, in 2017. The future is really to move toward more and better decision support system that would improve patient safety and to move toward clinical data convergence. Today in our ICU, we collect roughly, if you connect all your devices, roughly 6,000 data points per day that are available in real time and accessible for benchmarking and accessible to drive changes in the processes of care. That's one of the most important points. And then you can have all the smart experts, and I'm not one of them, that look at all the tools in the toolbox of analytical platforms and analytical methods. And indeed, this is where you need collaboration with data scientists, with statisticians, with people that actually know which one of the data mining method you're going to use to move from the data and the information you collected to descriptive and maybe again prescriptive analytics in the future. We need to use this data to appreciate our success and analyze our mistake. And that can come already from benchmarking, from real-time reports and dashboards. These data come from the EpiMed group, or friends and colleagues from Brazil that are intensivists, as we are, but decided a long time ago, initially for research purposes, to build a database and move on to benchmarking. And here you can see the standard mortality ratio when you're on the right side of the one. It's not so good for your patient, and also the amount of dollars you're spending to save a life, the standard resource utilization. And it's not about feeling proud when you're in the 10% best ICUs in the country. It's about thinking, how can we move from here to there? And again, just providing people with data, they change behavior. How many of you actually know which tidal volume is used in your unit reliably, the density of incidence of unplanned extubation, and so on. Today, if you connect an analytics tool to your EHR, you can actually get this information, the number of patients you ventilate in a year, the number of patients on NIV, and the density of incidence of auto-extubation. And you don't need to be an expert. You just need to actually click here and select patients with a specific diagnosis and actually have a refinement of this. Today, if you use, again, a system such as the EpiMed Monitor system, you can actually track the compliance with the measures you're taking to avoid ventilator-associated pneumonia. You can actually use this to drive changes in the processes of care and actually put protocols in place in a multidisciplinary way. And when you have jointly managed protocol, multidisciplinary protocol, you can actually reduce mortality and improve outcome, one of the important results of the orchestra study. I like this even better because you move beyond statistics. That's again coming from our Brazilian friend. They looked at a quality improvement initiative in 16 public hospitals, 900 beds in Rio. You can see that mortality was 47.8% with the SMR of 1.46. And when you give feedback to people, you reduce mortality and you improve SMR. You move from 46% additional mortality to 30% reduction in mortality and improved survival, just because you're giving people the data they need to change processes of care. That's how you actually try to move from the dilemma we have between doctors and evidence-based medicine. This is where you can also build science of medicine and bring this to work for research. This slide comes from Derek Angus that tells you that for a long time, clinical care and clinical research have lived in parallel universe. And using the EHR system, you can build studies at the point of care and actually move into the large pragmatic trial arena. There's been many publications already on that. And you can actually move on and use sophisticated Bayesian statistics to build platform trial, where you're basically focusing on a disease, not on a particular treatment, looking at multiple interventions, using sophisticated Bayesian statistics. And this is a terrific opportunity to engage our ICU teams in improving the way we care for patients. This is a terrific opportunity to build randomized, embedded, multi-center adaptive trial platforms trials. This is a terrific opportunity to actually fuse clinical research and clinical care, and this is self-learning healthcare. I'd like to finish by telling you that I believe today we are really moving towards data-driven redesign of care. And what I mean by data-driven redesign of care is that we are moving from clinical intelligence to indeed predictive analytics, from just looking and thinking, oh, the incidence of renal replacement therapy in my ICU was 8% last year, to think there is a probability for 4 new RRT patients this weekend, and maybe tomorrow prescriptive analytics when you think maybe Mr. Smith is at higher risk for renal failure and you could recommend volume expansion. Acute kidney injury is a great example, and it was really interesting to look at the ADQI consensus conference where they actually tried to think whether there is an agenda for improving safety in this field. Indeed, trying to build models that will identify the patients that are at high risk and obtain dashboard that could look like this, where you could see that this patient in bed number 5, indeed he has an increase in the risk of developing renal failure, and these are the drivers of the current risk, and maybe that's telling you where you can actually act and respond. Again, data coming from the EpiMed group showing you that these particular patients, community-acquired pneumonia, very high severity score, has actually quite a significant chance of having an increase in the ICU length of stay. Maybe these are the patients you'd like to target with specific management and get them seen 3 times by the physiotherapist with short-acting drugs. A lot of studies are published nowadays looking at the use of big data analytics for prediction modeling. We are really moving from evidence-based medicine to algorithm-based precision medicine, and we already have data showing us that the combination of genetic information, omics information, can help even in sepsis. It's not only cancer. But obviously, if you really want to look at the success of precision medicine, you have to move to the cancer field. And this is almost my last slide. That shows you that today, when you're collecting clinical variables, demographic information, molecular data, putting everything in a knowledge bank and using the tools of predictive modeling, you can actually make decisions for an individual patient while you estimate the standard chemotherapy and risk of relapse after stem cell transplantation, and give advice to one given patient, telling him, with all the data we have, the best we know is that this is what we should do. This happens only if you put in the database thousands and thousands of data. And that's a strong plea for inclusive cohorts, large sample size, and collaborative research. I believe in this because I believe that knowledge is power, and this is what will help us to improve the health of populations, improve patient experience where we still reduce per capita cost of healthcare. This is where we stand as doctors, at the interface between the rational motivation of human beings, the rational use of technology, and the continuous improvement of processes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jean-Daniel. We have time for one question. So that's fascinating, but I feel maybe a potential conflict between, on one hand, the need for pathophysiological-based medicine to individualize the delivery of care, and in the other hand, such an approach in which you put a protocol into the machine that you want to apply. And I will take the example of the RDS. For instance, we all know that 6 millimeters per kilogram of tie-dye volume is not probably the best target for everyone, because this is probably the less bad in general. So how do you deal with that?
So I'd like to disagree, actually. I think that the difference is that this type of technology will enable you to actually understand what you've done and get the outcome that are associated with our practice. Indeed, as you mentioned, it may be the less bad. It doesn't tell you what's actually going to be the best. And if you do not collect the information and analyze it carefully, and not only, as you mentioned, you said, oh, you're looking at the lungs, but you're not looking at the heart. If you are not combining multiple sources of information, then it becomes extremely noisy and extremely difficult to interpret. So it's definitely not a plea to put a protocol in a machine and say this is how this patient should be treated. This is just a way to actually collect data on what we are doing, learn from every single patient we treat and monitor every day. We trash away every day, each time we discharge a patient and turn off the monitor, thousands of data that could be very useful to, for instance, understand antecedents to cardiac arrest and so on. This is just a different way of looking at things, and they actually complement each other.
Okay, thank you. So it's time to conclude this session. So I want to thank the sponsor of the session. I want to thank everyone in the room, and of course my co-chair, as well as the speakers. Have a good afternoon.